I discovered 3 productivity principles that are so effective they almost feel like having superpowers. These aren't the same recycled tips you've heard before. They're based on 2025 research that reveals a shocking truth. 87% of professionals waste 6.2 hours daily on low-impact tasks that barely move the needle. The science behind these methods is incredible, and the results speak for themselves. Many learners report dramatically increasing their daily output while reducing stress and overwhelm. The first principle alone reveals how only 10% of our efforts truly drive results. But here's what most people miss about this concept. If you're working harder than ever, but feeling like you're falling behind, you're not alone. The modern Pareto revolution. The modern workplace has created a perfect storm of distraction. Last month, I spoke with Sarah, a marketing director who works from home. She told me she was putting in 13-hour days and still felt like she was falling behind. Her Slack notifications triggered an interruption every 3 minutes. Her inbox had over 500 unread emails, and she was constantly switching between project management tools and spreadsheets. She felt busy all the time but couldn't point to any major accomplishments. Sound familiar? Sarah's story represents what's happening to millions of remote workers right now. The data from 2025 workplace studies reveals a shocking truth. Recent research shows that roughly 20% of tasks yield 80% of impact, yet most professionals spend their time on the wrong 80%. That's more than 3/4 of an entire workday spent on low-value tasks. These aren't lazy people. They're working harder than ever before. But somewhere between the endless video calls, the constant notification checking, and the administrative busy work, the actual important stuff gets pushed aside. Here's what makes this even more interesting. In a recent study, workplace data indicate roughly 90% of output comes from 10% of tasks in digital environments, an even starker split than classic Pareto. Your grandparents didn't have 47 different apps demanding their attention. They didn't get pinged every 3 minutes with notifications. They didn't have to navigate endless email threads or sit through meetings that could have been a 2-sentence message. The modern work environment has created an illusion of productivity that keeps us trapped in constant motion without meaningful progress. A case study found teams implementing strict 80-20 prioritization saw multi-100% gains. The company had 12 developers working long hours, but missing every deadline. Their team lead decided to track exactly how each person spent their time for 2 weeks. The results were eye-opening. The developers were spending 78% of their day on activities that didn't directly contribute to shipping code. Status meetings, documentation updates, code reviews for minor features, and responding to non-urgent requests. They implemented a radical change. Each developer identified their top 10% activities, the tasks that actually moved features from concept to production. Everything else got eliminated, delegated, or scheduled for specific time blocks. The results were incredible. The team increased their output dramatically while working 25% fewer hours. They went from missing deadlines to finishing projects weeks early. This brings us to the first crucial insight about productivity in 2025. Identifying your true 10% high-impact activities isn't just helpful, it's survival. The digital environment throws so many distractions at us that without clear focus, we get swept away in a current of meaningless tasks. The good news is that modern technology can help us identify these high-impact activities in ways that weren't possible before. Time tracking apps now use machine learning to categorize your activities automatically. They can show you exactly which tasks correlate with your biggest wins. Project management tools provide analytics that reveal which types of work actually move the needle. Calendar apps can analyze your meeting patterns and highlight which ones led to concrete outcomes versus which ones were just time sinks. But here's the psychological trap that catches most people. Digital busy work feels productive in the moment. When you're responding to emails, updating spreadsheets, or jumping between different tools, your brain gets little hits of accomplishment. You feel like you're getting things done. The problem is that this feeling is completely disconnected from actual impact. I call this the productivity illusion. Your brain can't distinguish between being busy and being effective. When you clear 50 emails, it feels the same as completing a major project milestone. When you attend 5 meetings in a day, it feels as productive as writing code that ships to customers. But the long-term results tell a completely different story. The most successful professionals in 2025 have learned to use AI-powered analytics to cut through this illusion. They track not just what they do, but what outcomes their activities produce. They use tools that can identify patterns in their work and highlight the specific tasks that correlate with their biggest achievements. These systems can even predict which activities are likely to be high impact before you start them. For example, a content creator I know uses analytics tools that track everything from the time he spends researching topics to the engagement his content receives. After 6 months of data, the patterns became clear. His highest performing content came from 3 specific research sources, required exactly 90 minutes of writing time, and performed best when published on Tuesday mornings. Armed with this knowledge, he eliminated all the other research sources, standardized his writing process, and scheduled everything for optimal timing. His view count tripled while his workload decreased by 60%. The key is moving beyond gut feelings about what's important and letting data reveal your personal Pareto zones. Most people think they know which activities matter most, but they're usually wrong. The tasks that feel most important are often just the most visible or the most urgent, not the most impactful. This is where 2025's productivity tools become game changers. Smart analytics can identify patterns that would take years to notice manually. They can spot correlations between seemingly unrelated activities and outcomes. They can even factor in external variables like the day of the week, the time of day, or your energy levels to optimize when you tackle high-impact work. But the real power comes from using these insights to ruthlessly eliminate everything else. Once you know your 10%, you need the discipline to say no to the other 90%. This means declining meetings that don't directly serve your high-impact goals. It means automating or delegating the administrative tasks that feel urgent but don't drive results. It means accepting that some things simply won't get done, and that's perfectly fine. The professionals who master this updated Pareto approach don't just work more efficiently, they work on fundamentally different things than everyone else. While others get caught up in the daily grind of reactive tasks, they focus exclusively on the activities that compound over time. Master this principle alone, and you can realistically triple your productivity within 30 days. Not by working more hours or optimizing your existing tasks, but by identifying and focusing on the 10% of activities that actually matter. But what if I told you there's a way to take this principle even further? Pareto Squared for the digital age. The nested application reveals something even more powerful. You can actually apply the Pareto principle to itself. When you find the 10% within your 10%, you create what I call Pareto Squared. This nested approach generates productivity gains that feel almost unfair compared to how everyone else works. Let me tell you about Marcus, a software startup founder I met at a conference earlier this year. In January 2025, he was working 14-hour days trying to get his company off the ground. He had a small team, limited funding, and endless tasks competing for his attention. Product development, customer acquisition, investor meetings, team management, marketing strategy, the list never ended. By March, he was completely burned out, and his company was barely surviving. That's when he discovered the nested Pareto approach. Instead of just identifying his top 10% activities, he went one layer deeper. Within those high-impact tasks, he found the 10% that really drove everything else. Marcus realized that 1% of his total activities were responsible for 81% of his meaningful results. This wasn't theory. He tracked everything for 6 weeks, and the data was crystal clear. Here's how the math works. When you take 10% of your 10%, you get 1% of your total activities. But because each layer follows the Pareto distribution, that 1% drives 81% of your outcomes. It sounds impossible, but the compound effect creates exponential returns that most people never access because they stop at the first layer. Marcus applied this ruthlessly. His original 10% included product development, customer calls, strategic planning, and team meetings. When he examined the 10% within that list, he discovered something remarkable. The highest impact activity was a single weekly 1-hour session where he reviewed user feedback and prioritized the next 3 features to build. That 1 hour determined the direction of his entire company for the following week. Everything else became secondary. He delegated most customer calls to his sales team. He reduced strategic planning to implementing decisions from that weekly review session. Team meetings focused solely on executing the 3 prioritized features. By focusing on that critical 1%, Marcus built $1 million company while working only 4 hours per day. His revenue increased by 340% while his workload decreased by 75%. Recent productivity research from 2025 confirms what Marcus experienced. Studies tracking professionals who use the Pareto Squared method show they complete projects 8 times faster than colleagues using traditional approaches. The acceleration happens because they eliminate decision fatigue and context switching. When you know exactly which 1% matters most, every other choice becomes automatic. Modern project management tools make identifying these nested zones much easier than it was even 2 years ago. AI-powered analytics can track your activities and automatically calculate which tasks within your high-impact categories produce the most significant outcomes. These systems analyze patterns across weeks or months of data to reveal correlations that would be impossible to spot manually. For instance, productivity platforms now offer heat mapping features that show not just which projects matter most, but which specific steps within those projects drive the biggest results. Calendar analysis tools can identify which meetings actually lead to decisions versus which ones just consume time. Task management apps track completion rates and can predict which activities are most likely to cascade into further progress. The biggest mistake people make when they first learn about this approach is trying to optimize everything instead of finding their critical 1%. They create elaborate systems to improve their entire workflow when they should be ruthlessly eliminating 99% of their activities. The power comes from saying no to almost everything, not from making everything slightly better. Here's a perfect example from the content creation world. Jessica started a YouTube channel in January 2025 with the goal of building a substantial following. Initially, she was doing everything: scripting videos, filming, editing, thumbnail design, keyword research, community management, analytics review, competitor analysis, and social media promotion. She was working 60 hours per week and gaining maybe 200 subscribers per month. After 3 months of frustration, Jessica implemented Pareto Squared. Her analysis revealed that her top 10% activities were scripting, filming, and thumbnail design. But when she examined the 10% within that group, the data showed something unexpected. The single highest impact activity was spending 30 minutes every Sunday analyzing her 3 best performing videos from the previous month and identifying one specific element to replicate in the coming week. That half-hour session determined her content strategy, filming approach, and thumbnail style for the entire week. Everything else got automated, outsourced, or eliminated. She hired editors, used AI tools for keyword research, and automated most social media posting. By focusing on that critical weekly analysis session, Jessica built 500,000 followers in 6 months, while reducing her workload to 15 hours per week. This reveals something counterintuitive about productivity. Working on fewer things actually accelerates progress toward all your goals. When you spread your attention across many activities, you make incremental progress on everything, but breakthrough progress on nothing. When you focus intensely on the 1% that matters most, the compound effects accelerate everything else. The key is using real-time tracking to identify and measure these activities accurately. Modern productivity apps can monitor your Pareto Squared zones continuously and alert you when you're drifting away from your highest impact work. Some tools even use machine learning to predict when you're about to engage in low-value activities and suggest alternatives. The most advanced users create automated workflows that make engaging with their 1% activities as frictionless as possible, while adding friction to everything else. They use smart home devices to create environmental cues, calendar blocking to protect their most important work time, and AI assistants to handle routine decisions. What makes this approach particularly powerful in 2025 is how it combats the attention economy that's designed to fragment your focus. Social media, notifications, and digital distractions all profit from keeping you busy with low-impact activities. The Pareto Squared method creates a systematic defense against these forces by making your highest impact work so clear and compelling that distractions lose their appeal. When you truly understand which 1% of your activities drive 81% of your results, saying no to everything else becomes easy. You're not missing out. You're choosing exponential progress over linear improvement. Master this single technique, and you can compress months of traditional work into weeks of focused effort. But even with perfect focus on your highest impact activities, there's still one psychological barrier that stops most people from reaching their potential. It's actually the opposite of what you might expect. The Zygarnic effect meets modern psychology. Most people think the solution is working harder or finding better systems, but the real barrier is psychological. I have to admit something embarrassing. Earlier this year, I had this massive project that I needed to complete for a client. It was a comprehensive training program that would take weeks to develop, and I kept putting it off for almost a month. Every time I thought about starting it, my brain would come up with a dozen other urgent tasks that suddenly seemed more important. I would reorganize my desk, check emails for the third time that hour, or convince myself I needed to do more research before beginning. The project felt so overwhelming that I couldn't even figure out where to start. Then I discovered a psychological principle that completely changed how I approach difficult tasks. It's called the Zygarnic effect, and the latest research from behavioral psychology labs in 2025 shows something fascinating. Incomplete tasks create 3 times stronger motivation than completed ones. This isn't just theory. Neuroscientists can now measure this effect in real time using brain imaging technology. What makes this particularly relevant for 2025 is how our modern attention patterns have amplified this psychological phenomenon. We live in an environment of constant digital overwhelm where notifications, emails, and app alerts fragment our focus every few minutes. This creates a perfect storm where our brains are simultaneously pulled toward multiple incomplete tasks while struggling to maintain concentration on any single one. Here's what happened when I finally applied this principle to my stuck project. Instead of trying to complete the entire training program, I decided to deliberately start it without finishing it. I opened a new document, wrote down 3 bullet points about what the program would cover, and then immediately stopped. That's it. I didn't try to flesh out the ideas or create a detailed outline. I just started and left it incomplete. The effect was immediate and powerful. Within hours, my brain kept returning to those 3 bullet points. I found myself thinking about the project during lunch, while walking, and even when I was supposed to be working on other things. The incomplete task had created what psychologists call cognitive tension. My brain couldn't let go of the unfinished work. The 2025 neuroscience data reveals exactly why this happens. When we start a task but don't complete it, the brain's reward system activates differently than when we finish something. Completed tasks trigger a brief satisfaction response and then get filed away in memory. But incomplete tasks maintain an active neural loop that keeps pulling our attention back to them. The brain treats unfinished work as unresolved business that needs attention. This completely flips the traditional productivity advice that tells you to finish everything you start. Instead, the Zygarnic effect suggests that strategically starting tasks without finishing them can actually reduce anxiety and procrastination. When you're not pressuring yourself to complete something immediately, the mental barrier to beginning becomes much lower. Within 2 days of creating those 3 bullet points, I had naturally expanded them into a full outline. By the end of the week, I had completed sections that I thought would take me weeks to write. The project that I had been avoiding for a month got finished in less than 10 days, and the quality was better than if I had forced myself to power through it in a single marathon session. This principle has become standard practice among the most successful professionals in 2025. They deliberately leave work unfinished at strategic points to maintain momentum across days and weeks. A software developer I know always stops coding in the middle of a function before leaving work. A writer friend ends her writing sessions mid-sentence. A consultant deliberately leaves client presentations 80% complete before important meetings. The key insight is that when you leave work unfinished, your subconscious mind continues processing it even when you're not actively working. You'll find solutions to problems while taking a shower, get creative ideas during conversations, and return to the work with fresh energy and new perspectives. Many people resist this approach because they fear that leaving things incomplete will create more stress rather than less. This concern makes sense if you think about incomplete tasks as failures or loose ends, but the research shows the opposite effect. When you intentionally leave work unfinished as a strategic choice, it actually reduces the anxiety associated with starting difficult projects. The difference lies in reframing incompletion from accidental procrastination to deliberate productivity strategy. When you accidentally leave something unfinished because you ran out of time or energy, it feels stressful. When you strategically leave something unfinished to harness the Zygarnic effect, it feels like momentum. Remote work environments have made this principle even more powerful because traditional completion cues are missing. In a physical office, there are natural stopping points, lunch breaks, meetings, the end of the workday. These environmental cues help signal task completion and mental closure. When working from home, these boundaries become blurred, and tasks can feel perpetually unfinished in an unproductive way. Remote workers who master the Zygarnic effect create artificial completion cues while strategically leaving the right tasks unfinished. They might write a detailed plan for tomorrow's work before shutting down their computer, effectively completing the planning task while leaving the execution deliberately incomplete. They use project management tools to mark certain tasks as intentionally paused rather than simply unfinished. The psychological mechanism works because incompletion creates what researchers call productive obsession. Your brain allocates background processing power to the unfinished task, similar to how a computer runs programs in the background. This background processing often leads to breakthrough insights and creative solutions that wouldn't emerge through forced concentration. Professional writers have used this principle for decades without realizing the science behind it. Ernest Hemingway famously stopped writing mid-sentence when he knew what came next, making it easier to resume the following day. Modern creators are applying this same approach to video production, software development, and business strategy. The practical application requires changing how you define success and progress. Instead of measuring productivity by how many tasks you complete each day, you measure it by how many important tasks you successfully start and maintain momentum on. This shift transforms your relationship with difficult work from avoidance to engagement. When you redefine success as getting started rather than finishing, several psychological barriers dissolve immediately. The project doesn't need to be perfect before you begin. You don't need to have all the information or resources lined up. You don't need large blocks of uninterrupted time. You just need to start and trust that the Zygarnic effect will pull you back to continue the work. This approach works particularly well for creative and complex cognitive tasks that traditionally trigger procrastination. The bigger and more ambiguous the project, the more powerful the effect becomes. Your brain's natural tendency to seek closure becomes an ally rather than a source of stress. The transformation happens overnight. Once you stop trying to finish everything you start, and instead focus on starting the right things, productivity becomes effortless rather than forced. But what if you could take this psychological Zygarnic Squared, the Inception Method? The Inception Method takes this psychological principle to its logical extreme. You can apply the Zygarnic effect to the act of getting started itself, creating incomplete tasks within incomplete tasks. The psychological pull becomes so strong that starting feels automatic rather than forced. Let me tell you about David, a software developer who reached out to me in February 2025. He had a serious procrastination problem with coding projects. Every morning he would sit down at his computer with good intentions, but somehow he would end up spending hours browsing forums, reading documentation he didn't need, or reorganizing his project files. The actual coding would get pushed to later in the day, then to tomorrow, then to next week. He was talented and knew exactly what needed to be done, but something was blocking him from actually starting. David's breakthrough came when he started breaking down the process of getting started into smaller, incomplete tasks. Instead of trying to begin coding, he would start by getting started on getting started. He would open his code editor without writing any code. He would create a new file without adding content. He would write a single comment describing what the function should do, then walk away. Each of these micro-actions created its own Zygarnic loop, pulling his brain back to the work. The psychology behind this approach removes even the smallest barriers to action. When you think about starting a major coding project, your brain sees a massive, complex task that will require sustained attention and mental energy. But when you think about simply opening your code editor, that feels trivial and effortless. The key insight is that once you complete that first micro step, the Zygarnic effect kicks in and pulls you toward the next small action. David tracked his progress for 3 months using this method. The results were remarkable. Before implementing the Inception Method, he would start meaningful coding work maybe twice per week. After adopting the nested approach, he was beginning coding sessions almost daily. The 2025 data from productivity researchers confirms this pattern. People using the Zygarnic Squared approach start tasks 5 times more frequently than those using traditional methods. The secret is preparing your environment so that starting becomes inevitable rather than effortful. David completely restructured his workspace based on this principle. Every evening before finishing work, he would set up his desk for the next day's coding session. His monitor would be positioned at the right angle, his keyboard and mouse arranged perfectly, and his coffee mug placed exactly where he liked it. He would open his development tools and position the windows optimally for his workflow. Most importantly, he would create a tiny, incomplete task that would pull him back the next morning. For example, he might write a function signature without implementing it, or create a test case without writing the code to make it pass. These incomplete elements created cognitive tension that persisted overnight. When he sat down the next morning, his brain was already primed to complete what he had started. The physical environment supported this mental state by removing any friction from beginning work. The reverse Zygarnic technique works equally well for eliminating distractions. David applied this by making distracting activities harder to start. He logged out of social media accounts on his work computer, so accessing them required multiple steps. He moved his gaming setup to a different room, so playing games required physical effort. He uninstalled mobile apps that competed for his attention, making them inconvenient to access during work hours. This approach leverages the same psychological principle in reverse. Just as incomplete tasks pull your attention toward them, tasks that are difficult to start lose their magnetic appeal. When checking social media requires typing in your password and navigating through multiple screens, the friction often breaks the impulse before it becomes action. Professional developers, writers, and creators in 2025 have become masters at automating their getting started process. They use calendar reminders that trigger 30 minutes before work sessions, prompting them to prepare their environment. They create templates and boilerplates that reduce the mental overhead of beginning new projects. They use project management tools that automatically surface the next smallest step rather than overwhelming them with entire project scopes. AI assistants have become particularly powerful for triggering the Zygarnic effect automatically. David started using an AI coding assistant that would generate initial function stubs and comments based on his project requirements. Every morning, he would find partially completed code waiting for him, creating instant cognitive tension that pulled him into the work. The AI had essentially automated the process of creating strategic, incomplete tasks. Smart home technology amplifies this effect even further. David programmed his smart lights to gradually brighten his workspace 15 minutes before his scheduled coding time. His smart speaker would announce a gentle reminder to prepare his development environment. His phone would automatically switch to Do Not Disturb mode, and his computer would close all non-essential applications. These automated cues created a seamless transition into work mode without requiring willpower or decision-making. The most sophisticated practitioners use AI to generate initial project structures, outlines, or even rough drafts that provide a running start on creative work. A content creator might use AI to generate 3 potential video topics, then deliberately leave them undeveloped overnight. A business strategist might use AI to create an incomplete market analysis framework, then let the Zygarnic effect pull them back to flesh out the details. This method works especially well for creative and complex cognitive tasks that traditionally trigger procrastination. The bigger and more ambiguous the project, the more powerful the nested Zygarnic approach becomes. When you break down overwhelming creative work into tiny preparatory steps, the psychological barrier to beginning dissolves almost completely. David's coding output increased by over 300% within 6 weeks of implementing this approach. More importantly, he stopped experiencing the anxiety and guilt that came with chronic procrastination. The work began flowing naturally because he had engineered his environment and mental state to make starting feel effortless. The most advanced users report that after several months of practice, they rarely experience traditional procrastination at all. The nested Zygarnic loops become so automatic that avoiding work requires more effort than beginning it. Starting becomes the path of least resistance rather than the greatest challenge. Master this technique and procrastination becomes virtually impossible. Your brain will actively seek opportunities to complete the incomplete tasks you've strategically created. But even with perfect systems for starting and maintaining focus, there's one mindset shift that separates the highest performers from everyone else. It's actually the opposite of what most productivity advice teaches. Championship mentality in remote work era. The most successful remote workers in 2025 sometimes deliberately fail at their short-term goals. They miss daily targets, skip urgent tasks, and ignore immediate opportunities that everyone else jumps on. This sounds like terrible advice until you understand what they're actually doing. They're playing a completely different game than everyone else. Let me explain this with a story that changed how I think about productivity forever. In the 1950s, Toyota was struggling to compete with American car manufacturers. Their production was slow, their quality was inconsistent, and they were losing market share every month. The obvious solution seemed to be working faster and pushing harder to meet daily production quotas. Instead, Toyota did something that seemed crazy. They deliberately slowed down their production lines and spent time fixing problems that were slowing them down in the long run. Workers were encouraged to stop the entire assembly line whenever they spotted a defect, even if it meant missing that day's production targets. Managers spent weeks redesigning processes instead of just pushing through with existing methods. From the outside, it looked like Toyota was sabotaging their own productivity. Their daily output dropped while competitors were churning out more cars than ever. But here's what happened over the following years. While competitors were hitting their daily numbers but dealing with constant quality issues, recalls, and inefficient processes, Toyota built a manufacturing system that eventually dominated the global market. They sacrificed thousands of short-term wins to create a system that generated millions of long-term victories. This same principle applies to personal productivity in 2025's digital work environment. Research from this year shows that professionals who embrace strategic short-term losses achieve 4 times better long-term outcomes than those who optimize for daily metrics. The data comes from tracking over 10,000 remote workers across different industries for an entire year. The remote work revolution has made this championship mentality more critical than ever before. When you work from home, there's incredible pressure to demonstrate productivity through visible daily accomplishments. You feel like you need to send that email immediately, join every meeting, and show constant progress on every project. The tools we use reinforce this mindset with daily task counters, streak tracking, and productivity scores that make you feel productive when you check lots of boxes. But optimizing for these daily productivity metrics often destroys your monthly and yearly results. If you spend every day responding to urgent requests, attending unnecessary meetings, and working on whatever feels most important in the moment, you never build the systems and skills that create exponential improvements over time. I know a software engineer named Rachel who experienced this firsthand. In early 2025, she was obsessed with her daily productivity metrics. She tracked how many tickets she closed, how many lines of code she wrote, and how quickly she responded to messages. Her dashboard looked impressive every single day. She was consistently one of the top performers on her team, according to all the daily measurements. But Rachel noticed something troubling. Despite hitting all her daily targets, she wasn't actually getting better at her job. The same types of problems kept recurring. She was solving the same bugs over and over again because she never took time to address the underlying issues. She was writing lots of code, but it was messy and hard to maintain. She was responding to messages quickly, but many of them were questions that could have been prevented with better documentation. Rachel decided to try a different approach. She started deliberately failing at some of her daily metrics to invest time in building better systems. Instead of immediately fixing every bug that came in, she would spend time identifying patterns and creating tools to prevent similar issues. Instead of writing quick code to meet deadlines, she would invest extra time in creating reusable components. Instead of responding to every question immediately, she would write comprehensive documentation that prevented future questions. Her daily productivity scores dropped significantly. She closed fewer tickets, wrote fewer lines of code, and responded to messages more slowly. From the outside, it looked like her performance was declining. But within 3 months, the compound effects became obvious. The tools she built started preventing dozens of bugs before they occurred. The reusable components she created allowed her team to build features in half the time. The documentation she wrote eliminated hundreds of repetitive questions. By the end of the year, Rachel was completing more meaningful work than ever before while working fewer hours. She had sacrificed immediate wins to build superior systems, and those systems generated exponential returns. This creates a real challenge in our social media-driven work culture. There's enormous pressure to show constant, visible progress. LinkedIn posts celebrate daily achievements. Team stand-ups focus on what you accomplished yesterday. Performance reviews often emphasize short-term metrics over long-term system building. It takes real courage to deliberately underperform on visible metrics while investing in invisible improvements. The championship mentality also protects against the burnout epidemic that's affecting 73% of remote workers in 2025. When you're constantly optimizing for daily output, you're essentially sprinting a marathon. You push hard every single day trying to maximize immediate results, but this approach is completely unsustainable over months and years. Championship-level performers understand that some days are for building, some days are for executing, and some days are for recovering. They deliberately schedule periods of lower output to invest in learning new skills, improving their systems, or simply recharging their mental energy. This might mean saying no to urgent projects to attend a training program. It might mean spending a week refactoring code instead of building new features. It might mean turning down immediate opportunities to focus on developing capabilities that will create better opportunities later. Learning and system building have become more valuable than task completion in today's rapidly changing economy. The specific skills and knowledge that make you productive today might be obsolete in 2 years. The tools and platforms you're using today will definitely be different in 5 years. But if you build strong learning systems and adaptable working methods, you can thrive regardless of how the landscape changes. I know a consultant who deliberately turns down 80% of the projects that come his way, even when he needs the money. Instead of taking every available project, he only accepts work that forces him to develop new capabilities or build better systems. This means he often earns less money in any given month than he could by saying yes to everything. But over time, This approach has made him one of the most sought-after experts in his field because his capabilities compound while others stay static. The same principle applies to choosing which tasks to work on each day. Championship-level performers don't just ask, what needs to be done today? They ask, what can I work on today that will make everything easier tomorrow? They sacrifice the satisfaction of completing lots of small tasks to focus on the systems that eliminate future work entirely. Playing the long game has become the ultimate competitive advantage in 2025's fast-paced world. While everyone else gets caught up in the daily grind of reactive work, championship performers are building the capabilities and systems that will dominate future opportunities. But what if there was a way to accelerate this entire process and develop championship-level insights much faster than traditional methods allow? Championship mentality accelerated. The traditional approach of slowly building expertise through gradual experience is outdated and inefficient. Modern technology and systematic experimentation can compress decades of learning into weeks of focused testing. Let me tell you about Maria, a marketing director who transformed her entire approach to campaign management in just 6 weeks during early 2025. She had been running digital advertising campaigns for 3 years, using the same methods she learned from online courses and industry best practices. Her results were decent, but not exceptional. She was spending roughly 40 hours per week managing campaigns that generated predictable but unimpressive returns for her clients. Maria's breakthrough came when she decided to treat every single day as a learning laboratory. Instead of running campaigns the way she always had, she started designing micro-experiments to test specific assumptions about her work. On Monday, she tested whether campaigns performed better when she wrote ad copy in the morning versus the afternoon. Tuesday, she experimented with different keyword research methods. Wednesday, she tested various bidding strategies. Each experiment was small and focused, designed to answer one specific question about what actually drove results. Within 2 weeks, Maria had gathered more actionable insights about campaign optimization than she had learned in the previous 2 years of passive experience. She discovered that her ad copy performed 34% better when written between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. when her energy levels were naturally higher. She found that a specific keyword research tool nobody talks about consistently outperformed the industry standard software. Most importantly, she identified 3 bidding strategies that worked significantly better for her client base than the approaches she had been using. The data supporting this approach is remarkable. Research from 2025 shows that active experimentation beats passive experience by a factor of 10 to 1. This means that professionals who systematically test and refine their methods learn 10 times faster than those who simply accumulate experience through repetition. The difference isn't just about speed. The quality of insights gained through deliberate experimentation far exceeds what you get from passively doing the same tasks over and over. The key is designing micro-experiments that provide maximum learning in minimum time. These aren't complex research studies that take weeks to set up. They're simple tests that can be implemented immediately and produce clear results within days or even hours. The most effective micro-experiments follow a specific pattern. They test one variable at a time, have clear success metrics, and can be completed quickly enough to run multiple tests per week. For example, a content creator might test whether posting videos at 9 a.m. or 6 p.m. generates more engagement. A software developer might experiment with different coding approaches to see which produces cleaner, more maintainable code. A consultant might test whether discovery calls work better when structured as interviews versus collaborative planning sessions. Each experiment teaches something specific and actionable. The biggest mistake most people make is wasting months thinking about changes instead of testing them immediately. They'll spend weeks researching the best project management tool instead of trying 3 different options for a week each. They'll debate whether to wake up earlier or work later instead of experimenting with different schedules. They'll analyze successful people's morning routines instead of testing elements from those routines to see what actually works for their specific situation. This analysis paralysis keeps people stuck in ineffective patterns for years. They become experts at researching solutions rather than experts at implementing them. Meanwhile, championship-level performers are constantly running small tests that provide real-world feedback about what actually works versus what sounds good in theory. The most successful professionals in 2025 have turned daily experimentation into a systematic practice. They maintain experiment logs that track what they tested, what they learned, and what they'll try next. They schedule specific times for running tests, so experimentation becomes a habit rather than something they do occasionally when motivated. They measure results consistently, so they can identify patterns across multiple experiments. Sarah, a freelance graphic designer, runs 3 micro-experiments every week as part of her standard routine. One experiment focuses on her creative process, one on client communication, and one on business development. Over 6 months, she has tested over 70 different approaches to running her business. The cumulative effect of these small experiments has been extraordinary. Her client satisfaction scores increased by 45%, her project completion speed doubled, and her income grew by 120% while working fewer hours. The fear of failure often keeps people trapped in ineffective patterns for years. They worry that experimenting with new approaches might temporarily reduce their performance or create problems with clients or colleagues. This fear is completely backwards. Staying stuck with mediocre methods guarantees continued mediocre results. Experimenting with improvements might occasionally produce worse short-term outcomes, but it's the only path to breakthrough performance. Modern AI and data analytics tools have accelerated the learning process beyond what was possible even 2 years ago. Machine learning algorithms can analyze your experiment results and suggest new tests based on patterns they identify. Productivity apps can track multiple variables simultaneously and help you understand which combinations produce the best outcomes. Analytics platforms can provide insight that would take months to discover manually. For instance, time-tracking apps now use AI to identify correlations between your activities and your energy levels, mood, and output quality. They can suggest optimal times for different types of work based on patterns in your personal data. Project management tools can analyze your completion rates and recommend workflow adjustments that increase efficiency. Email analytics can reveal which communication approaches generate the best responses from different types of contacts. Financial advisor Tom used AI-powered analytics to optimize his client consultation process. The software tracked everything from the length of meetings to the specific questions he asked to the outcomes achieved for each client. Within 8 weeks of systematic experimentation guided by AI insights, Tom had identified the exact consultation structure that maximized client satisfaction and conversion rates. His closing rate improved from 23% to 67%, while his average meeting time decreased by 40%. The compound effect of accelerated learning creates exponential rather than linear improvement. Each experiment builds on previous insights, creating a feedback loop that generates increasingly sophisticated understanding of what drives results in your specific situation. Championship-level performers don't just work harder or longer. They learn faster and apply insights more systematically than everyone else. This accelerated approach can deliver championship-level insights in weeks rather than years. The combination of systematic experimentation, AI-powered analytics, and rapid iteration creates a learning velocity that was impossible in previous decades. But what happens when you take the illegal productivity stack? The synergy creates what I call the illegal productivity stack. This isn't just about using 3 separate techniques. It's about leveraging their mathematical compound effects to achieve productivity gains that feel like cheating. The numbers are mind-blowing when you look at the combined impact. Pareto Squared alone can create 9x improvements by focusing on your critical 1% activities. Zygarnic Squared eliminates procrastination and can double your task initiation rate. Accelerated Championship compresses years of learning into weeks, creating another 3x multiplier. When these principles work together rather than separately, the mathematical impact reaches 16x productivity gains compared to traditional approaches. Let me share a real case study from 2025 that demonstrates exactly what this looks like in practice. James was a marketing consultant who had been struggling to grow his business for 2 years. He was working 60-hour weeks, barely keeping up with client demands, and constantly stressed about missing deadlines. His income had plateaued despite putting in more effort than ever before. He was the definition of busy, but not productive. In January 2025, James decided to implement the full stack. First, he used Pareto Squared to identify his critical 1% activities. Through careful tracking and analysis, he discovered that one specific type of client consultation generated 81% of his business value. Everything else, proposal writing, follow-up emails, administrative tasks, social media posting, contributed relatively little to his actual results. Next, he applied Zygarnic squared to eliminate his chronic procrastination around business development activities. Instead of trying to complete entire sales processes, he broke them into micro-tasks that he could start without finishing. He would draft 1 paragraph of a proposal and stop. He would research 3 potential clients and leave the outreach for later. He would create presentation templates without filling in the content. These incomplete tasks created psychological tension that pulled him back to continue the work naturally. Finally, James embraced accelerated championship by treating every client interaction as a learning experiment. Instead of just delivering services the way he always had, he systematically tested different approaches and measured the results. He experimented with different consultation formats, proposal structures, and pricing strategies. Each week brought new insights that compounded his effectiveness. The results were extraordinary. Within 3 weeks, James had achieved what typically would have taken him 6 months. His client satisfaction scores increased dramatically, his closing rate improved from 30 to 78%, and his average project value doubled. Most importantly, he was working 25 hours per week instead of 60, while generating more revenue than ever before. The key insight is that these principles work synergistically rather than just additively. When you focus intensely on your Pareto zones, the Zygarnic effect becomes more powerful because you're creating incomplete loops around high-impact activities. When you use strategic incompletion for your most important work, you naturally gravitate toward championship-level system building. When you accelerate your learning through experimentation, you quickly identify better Pareto zones and more effective Zygarnic triggers. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle where each principle amplifies the others. Your focused attention reveals better opportunities for strategic incompletion. Your incomplete tasks drive you toward more impactful activities. Your rapid experimentation optimizes both your focus and your psychological triggers. The system becomes more effective the longer you use it. The daily routine that incorporates all 3 methods flows seamlessly together. Each morning, James would spend 15 minutes identifying his Pareto zone for the day, the single most impactful activity he could work on. Then he would deliberately start that activity without trying to complete it, creating the Zygarnic tension that would pull him back throughout the day. Finally, he would design one small experiment within that work to test and improve his approach. This routine eliminated decision fatigue because the choices became automatic. Instead of wondering what to work on, he focused on his predetermined Pareto zone. Instead of struggling to start difficult tasks, the Zygarnic loops made beginning feel inevitable. Instead of repeating the same approaches, he constantly refined his methods through systematic experimentation. Most people make critical implementation mistakes that reduce the effectiveness of this combined approach. The biggest error is trying to optimize everything instead of ruthlessly focusing on the critical 1% that drives results. They create elaborate systems for managing all their tasks when they should be eliminating 99% of them. They start too many incomplete loops instead of focusing on a few high-impact ones. They experiment with trivial improvements instead of testing fundamental assumptions about their work. Another common mistake is implementing the principles sequentially instead of simultaneously. They try to master Pareto Squared first, then add Zygarnic techniques, then incorporate experimentation. This approach misses the synergistic effects that make the stack so powerful. The principles need to work together from the beginning to create the compound benefits. This combination is particularly powerful for knowledge workers and creative professionals because it addresses the unique challenges of cognitive work. Traditional productivity advice focuses on managing physical tasks and time, but knowledge work requires managing attention, creativity, and complex problem solving. The stack optimizes for the psychological and cognitive factors that actually determine success in intellectual work. The system adapts to different personality types and work styles because it's based on universal psychological principles rather than rigid procedures. Introverts might create longer, incomplete loops that provide sustained focus, while extroverts might prefer shorter cycles with more frequent experiments. Detail-oriented people might track more variables in their experiments, while big-picture thinkers might focus on broader pattern recognition. Visual learners can use mind mapping tools to identify their Pareto zones, while analytical types might prefer spreadsheet-based tracking. The core principles remain constant, but the implementation details flex to match individual preferences and cognitive styles. Mastering this integration creates a permanent competitive advantage because it fundamentally changes how you approach work. While others remain trapped in reactive productivity patterns, you operate from a strategic framework that consistently generates superior results with less effort. The compound effects build over months and years, creating an exponentially widening gap between your output and that of people using traditional approaches. This isn't just about getting more done, it's about developing a completely different relationship with work, where extraordinary productivity feels natural rather than forced. But implementing these principles manually requires significant mental energy and discipline. What if there was a way to automate the entire system and make it run effortlessly in the background? Technology Amplifiers for 2025. The technology available in 2025 transforms these principles from manual techniques into automated systems that work continuously in the background. These aren't just apps or tools, they're intelligent systems that automatically amplify the 3 productivity principles we've discussed. The difference between someone who knows these principles and someone who masters them often comes down to having the right technology set up, working behind the scenes. AI-powered productivity assistants have revolutionized how we identify personal Pareto zones by analyzing work patterns in real time. These systems track everything you do throughout the day and use machine learning algorithms to identify which activities actually correlate with your biggest wins. Instead of guessing which tasks matter most, the AI shows you exactly which 10% of your activities drive 90% of your results, based on your specific work patterns and outcomes. These assistants monitor your calendar, email responses, project completion rates, and even your energy levels throughout different parts of the day. After collecting data for just 2 weeks, they can predict which types of meetings will be productive versus which ones will waste time. They identify which communication styles get the best responses from different contacts. They even recognize patterns in when you do your most impactful creative work and automatically protect those time slots from interruptions. The AI goes beyond simple time tracking by analyzing the quality and impact of your work outputs. It can determine that the 3 emails you wrote on Tuesday morning generated more business value than the entire afternoon of meetings you attended. It recognizes that your best strategic thinking happens between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. on days when you've exercised beforehand. These insights would take years to discover manually, but AI can identify them within weeks. Smart scheduling tools have revolutionized how we trigger the Zygarnic effect at optimal times throughout the day. These systems understand your natural energy patterns and automatically create strategic incomplete tasks when you're most likely to benefit from the psychological tension. Instead of leaving work unfinished randomly, the technology deliberately schedules partial task completion at moments when the cognitive pull will be strongest. These tools can detect when you're approaching a natural break in your workflow and suggest starting a new high-impact task without finishing it. They know from your historical data that you tend to have creative breakthroughs around 3 p.m., So they'll prompt you to begin outlining tomorrow's most important project at 2:45 p.m. By the time you reach your peak creative period, the incomplete task is already pulling your attention toward productive work. The scheduling systems also integrate with your email and messaging platforms to create Zygarnic loops across different types of communication. They might draft the first paragraph of an important email and save it to your drafts folder, creating psychological tension that pulls you back to complete the message when your mental energy is optimal for that type of communication. Productivity analytics platforms now provide real-time tracking of your championship mentality progress by measuring long-term system building versus short-term task completion. These platforms distinguish between activities that feel productive in the moment and activities that actually build capabilities for future success. They track metrics like learning velocity, system improvements, and skill development alongside traditional productivity measures. The analytics can show you when you're falling into the trap of optimizing for daily metrics at the expense of long-term growth. They measure how much time you spend building reusable systems versus doing one-off tasks. They track your experimentation rate and learning outcomes from trying new approaches. Most importantly, they help you see the compound effects of championship-level thinking by correlating your system-building activities with long-term performance improvements. Automation eliminates the friction that typically prevents consistent application of these methods by removing the mental overhead of implementing the principles manually. Smart home technology can automatically prepare your environment for optimal productivity by adjusting lighting, temperature, and ambient noise based on the type of work you're about to begin. Your devices can switch to focus modes that eliminate distractions without requiring conscious decision-making. AI assistants can automatically break down large projects into smaller, incomplete tasks that trigger the Zygarnic effect. They can schedule these microtasks throughout your week to maintain momentum on important projects. They can even generate initial drafts, outlines, or frameworks for creative work, so you always have something incomplete, pulling your attention toward high-impact activities. Specific applications available in 2025 make implementing these principles effortless by integrating all the functionality into seamless workflows. Platforms like Motion use AI to automatically schedule your most important work during your peak energy periods while creating strategic incomplete tasks to maintain momentum. Tools like Reclaim protect your focus time by automatically declining conflicts and rescheduling low-priority commitments. Analytics platforms such as Rescue Time have evolved to track not just time spent, but the impact and quality of different activities. They can automatically identify your personal Pareto zones and send alerts when you're drifting away from high-impact work. Knowledge management tools now include AI features that can automatically organize incomplete tasks and surface relevant information when you're ready to continue working on strategic projects. The concern that technology might become a distraction rather than an amplifier is valid, but the solution lies in thoughtful setup rather than avoiding these tools entirely. The key is configuring your digital environment to support your productivity goals instead of working against them. This means using automation to eliminate decision fatigue while maintaining conscious control over your most important choices. The integration strategies that connect all productivity tools into one seamless system focus on data flow and automated decision-making. Your calendar, task manager, communication tools, and analytics platforms should share information automatically so insights from one tool can trigger actions in others. When your time tracking reveals you're in a high-energy state, your task manager should automatically surface your most important incomplete work. The right technology setup makes extraordinary productivity feel automatic because it handles the mechanical aspects of implementing these principles while you focus on the strategic and creative work that only humans can do. The system becomes an extension of your thinking rather than a separate set of tools you need to manage. But knowing about these tools and actually implementing them successfully are two completely different challenges. Real-world implementation blueprint. The practical implementation starts tomorrow morning with a simple 5-step process that takes exactly 15 minutes. First, Open a document and write down every task you think you need to do this week. Don't organize or prioritize yet, just brain dump everything onto the page. Second, identify which 3 tasks would create the most impact if completed perfectly. Third, pick one of those 3 tasks and break it into the smallest possible starting action. Fourth, complete only that starting action and deliberately stop before finishing the entire task. Fifth, schedule 15 minutes tomorrow morning to repeat this process. This 5-step sequence establishes all 3 principles immediately without overwhelming complexity. The 30 to 60 90-day roadmap ensures you build sustainable habits rather than experience temporary enthusiasm that fades after 2 weeks. Days 1 through 30 focus exclusively on identifying and protecting your Pareto zones. Every morning, spend 10 minutes identifying your single most impactful task for that day. Track which activities consistently appear in your top 10% and which ones you thought were important but actually contributed little. By day 30, you'll have clear data about your personal productivity patterns instead of relying on assumptions. Days 31 through 60 introduce strategic incompletion while maintaining your Pareto focus. Start ending your workday by beginning tomorrow's most important task without finishing it. Create incomplete outlines, draft opening sentences, or set up project templates that pull your attention back the next morning. The key is leaving work in a state that creates psychological tension rather than closure. Most people resist this initially because it feels wrong to leave things unfinished, but the Zygarnic effect makes starting the next day effortless. Days 61 through 90 add systematic experimentation to optimize your approach continuously. Design one small test each week to improve how you identify Pareto activities or trigger Zygarnic loops. Try different times of day for high-impact work. Experiment with various methods for creating incomplete tasks. Test different environments or tools. Document what works and what doesn't, so you're building a personalized productivity system rather than copying generic advice. Customization based on your work situation and personality type determines whether this system becomes effortless or feels forced. Visual processors benefit from mind mapping their Pareto zones and creating visual cues for incomplete tasks. Analytical types prefer spreadsheets tracking their productivity patterns and quantitative measures of improvement. Introverts often need longer, uninterrupted blocks for Pareto work, while extroverts might prefer shorter bursts with more frequent check-ins. Remote workers face different challenges than office employees. Working from home requires stronger boundaries around Pareto time because household distractions constantly compete for attention. Creating physical cues helps trigger focus states. Specific lighting, background music, or even changing clothes signals your brain that high-impact work is starting. Office workers need strategies for protecting Pareto time from meeting requests and colleague interruptions. This might mean blocking calendar time, using noise-canceling headphones, or finding alternative spaces for focused work. Creative professionals apply these principles differently than analytical workers. Writers might identify their Pareto zone as the specific research method that generates their best ideas, then create incomplete outlines to trigger continuation the next day. Software developers might focus on the coding practices that produce the cleanest, most maintainable code, then deliberately stop mid-function to maintain momentum. Managers might discover their highest impact comes from one-on-one coaching conversations, then prepare incomplete discussion frameworks that create psychological pull toward meaningful team interactions. Common implementation challenges arise predictably, and having troubleshooting strategies ready prevents abandoning the system when obstacles appear. The most frequent problem is guilt about leaving tasks incomplete or ignoring seemingly urgent requests. This guilt stems from old productivity conditioning that equates busyness with effectiveness. Combat this by tracking outcomes rather than activities. When you see that working on fewer things produces better results, the guilt dissolves naturally. Another challenge is correctly identifying Pareto activities. Many people initially choose tasks that feel important rather than activities that actually drive results. Solve this by tracking outcomes for 2 weeks before making decisions about what matters most. Look for patterns in which activities precede your biggest wins, not which activities consume the most time or energy. Measuring progress requires tracking leading indicators rather than lagging results. Leading indicators include how consistently you identify daily Pareto tasks, how often you successfully create incomplete loops, and how frequently you run small experiments. These behaviors predict future productivity improvements better than measuring completed tasks or hours worked. Track these metrics weekly and adjust your approach based on patterns you observe. Social and environmental factors significantly influence your success with this system. Family members or colleagues who constantly interrupt high-impact work can sabotage even perfect implementation. Address this by educating people about your focused work times and explaining how protecting these periods benefits everyone through higher quality output. Create physical or digital boundaries that signal when you're in Pareto mode and shouldn't be disturbed. Accountability methods focus on consistency rather than perfection. Weekly reviews examine whether you protected your Pareto time, created effective, incomplete loops, and learned from your experiments. The goal isn't completing everything perfectly, but building sustainable habits that compound over time. Some people benefit from accountability apps that track behavior rather than outcomes. Others prefer human accountability through productivity partners who check in weekly about system implementation. Gradually increasing intensity prevents burnout while building momentum. Start with 30-minute daily Pareto blocks and extend them as the habit solidifies. Begin with simple, incomplete tasks and progress to more complex strategic incompletion as you understand the psychological effects. Start with weekly experiments and increase frequency as designing tests becomes natural. Following this blueprint creates systematic behavior change rather than relying on motivation or willpower. However, even with a perfect roadmap, most people still encounter specific common pitfalls and how to avoid them. The most destructive patterns emerge from 5 specific mistakes that sabotage productivity transformations before they can take hold. Smart, motivated individuals who understand the theory perfectly somehow never achieve the extraordinary results they expect because knowledge alone isn't enough. The first mistake is trying to apply these principles to everything at once, instead of starting with one focused area. People learn about Pareto Squared and immediately try to optimize their entire life, their work projects, their personal habits, and their social relationships simultaneously. They create elaborate systems for tracking every possible high-impact activity across dozens of different domains. This approach overwhelms the brain and prevents you from developing real expertise with any single application of the principles. The second mistake is treating incompletion as a productivity hack rather than a psychological tool. People start leaving tasks unfinished randomly without understanding the specific conditions that make the Zygarnic effect work effectively. They abandon projects halfway through and wonder why they feel more stressed rather than more motivated. They create so many incomplete loops that their brain becomes overwhelmed trying to track everything rather than drawn toward specific, high-impact work. The third mistake involves misunderstanding what championship mentality actually means. Some people interpret this as never caring about short-term results, which leads them to ignore deadlines, miss commitments, and alienate colleagues while claiming they're playing the long game. Others swing the opposite direction and become obsessed with daily metrics while forgetting to invest in system building. Both extremes miss the balance that makes this approach sustainable. The fourth mistake is perfectionism, masquerading as high standards. People spend weeks analyzing their work patterns before identifying their Pareto zones. They research dozens of productivity tools before choosing one. They design elaborate tracking systems before starting any experiments. This analysis paralysis prevents them from gathering the real-world data they need to optimize their approach. The fifth mistake is treating these methods as temporary techniques rather than permanent mindset shifts. People implement the illegal productivity stack for a few weeks, see some improvements, then gradually drift back to their old reactive patterns. They never develop the systematic thinking that makes extraordinary productivity feel natural rather than forced. Alex, a software project manager, made several of these mistakes when he first tried implementing these principles in March 2025. Alex was managing 3 different development teams and feeling overwhelmed by competing priorities. He decided to apply Pareto Squared to everything simultaneously: his team management, personal coding projects, administrative tasks, and even his workout routine. He started leaving dozens of tasks incomplete each day, thinking this would create helpful psychological tension. He also decided that championship mentality meant ignoring all short-term deadlines to focus on long-term team development. The results were disastrous. His teams became confused because he would start initiatives and abandon them midstream. His boss grew frustrated with missed deadlines and incomplete deliverables. Alex felt more scattered than ever because his brain was trying to track so many incomplete tasks that he couldn't focus on anything meaningful. After 6 weeks, he was ready to give up on the entire approach. Alex's breakthrough came when he realized he needed to start much smaller and more systematically. He chose one specific area, sprint planning meetings, and applied Pareto Squared only to that domain. He identified the single most impactful element of these meetings, which turned out to be the first 15 minutes when the team reviewed what they had learned from the previous sprint. He used the Zygarnic effect strategically by ending each sprint planning session with an incomplete outline for the next retrospective discussion. He applied championship mentality by spending time between meetings improving the retrospective process rather than just rushing through administrative tasks. Within a month, Alex's sprint planning meetings became the most productive sessions his teams had ever experienced. The success in this one area gave him confidence to gradually expand the approach to other domains, but he never again tried to optimize everything simultaneously. Perfectionism becomes the enemy of the Pareto principle because it prevents you from embracing good enough strategically. When you spend excessive time polishing work that falls outside your critical 10%, you're essentially optimizing the 90% that produces minimal impact. The goal isn't to do everything perfectly. It's to do the right things well enough while ignoring everything else. This means accepting that some projects will be mediocre, some emails will be brief, and some meetings will be less polished than you might prefer. Strategic good enough means setting different quality standards for different types of work based on their impact level. Your Pareto zone activities deserve high attention and quality. Everything else gets the minimum viable effort required to avoid negative consequences. This approach feels uncomfortable initially because most people have been conditioned to strive for excellence in all areas, but it's mathematically impossible to excel at everything while maintaining extraordinary overall productivity. The Zygarnic effect trap occurs when people start too many incomplete tasks and create overwhelming cognitive load rather than helpful psychological tension. The effect works best with 2 or 3 strategically incomplete high-impact tasks, not dozens of abandoned projects. When your brain is trying to track too many incomplete loops, the psychological tension becomes anxiety rather than motivation. The solution is ruthless selectivity about which tasks you leave unfinished and regular completion of lower-impact, incomplete items to maintain cognitive clarity. Championship mentality mistakes happen when people sacrifice too much short-term progress or not enough. Sacrificing too much means ignoring all immediate deadlines and commitments, while claiming to focus on long-term improvements. This approach damages relationships and credibility while providing no real benefit. Sacrificing too little means optimizing for daily metrics without ever investing time in system building or capability development. The balance requires protecting some time for long-term work while maintaining enough short-term progress to meet essential commitments. Early warning signs that your productivity system is becoming counterproductive include increased stress levels, decreased clarity about priorities, and growing resistance to your own productivity methods. If implementing these principles feels forced rather than natural after several weeks, you're probably trying to change too much too quickly. If you find yourself spending more time managing your productivity system than doing actual work, you've overcomplicated the approach. The mindset shifts that separate successful implementers from those who give up involve embracing experimentation over perfection, focusing on systems over outcomes, and valuing consistency over intensity. Successful implementers treat failed experiments as valuable data rather than personal failures. They optimize for sustainable practices rather than impressive short-term results. They measure success by how consistently they apply the principles rather than how dramatically their output increases each week. When you inevitably fall off track with your new habits, recovery requires honest analysis without self-judgment. Identify which specific circumstances led to the breakdown and adjust your system to handle those situations better in the future. Restart with smaller commitments rather than trying to immediately resume your full implementation. Focus on rebuilding one principle at a time rather than attempting to restore your entire productivity stack simultaneously. Understanding these pitfalls increases your success probability from roughly 20% to 80%. Because most people abandon these methods due to implementation mistakes rather than flawed principles. The concepts work reliably when applied correctly, but they require more systematic thinking than most productivity advice. Once you understand what not to do, you're ready to discover what extraordinary productivity actually means. The transformation happens when you realize that extraordinary productivity isn't about working harder or longer hours. It's about working on the right things in the right way, using these 3 principles we've covered. The difference between someone who stays busy all day and someone who achieves remarkable results comes down to focus, psychology, and mindset. Don't wait for the perfect moment to start implementing these methods. Pick just one principle today and begin applying it immediately. Start identifying your Pareto zones, create one incomplete task, or run a single small experiment. Action beats perfection every time. In 2025's rapidly changing world, productivity determines whether you stay relevant and competitive